Right, Simon?
That's fair. Cool. Well, we're 5 minutes past the hour. I'm sure it looks like a couple people are still joining, but we may as well kick off. I'm sure that this is going to end up being a jam-packed hour. Just for people who haven't used Zoom in the past for webinars, there is a question and answer functionality at the bottom of the screen. I believe it's at the bottom on everybody's screen. Feel free to throw questions in there. We'll host a question and answer period at the end, but also throughout the presentation, I'll try to make sure that I sneak in any of your questions for Raia today. But without further ado, I think it's time to introduce Raia. Raia and we go back, I don't know, way too long.
Don't age us too much, Simon.
Date ourselves,
yeah.
So I'll say since we were maybe 15.
Yeah.
She is super impressive, 3-time certified life coach, motivational speaker, and very passionate about diversity and inclusion, as it's affected her and as she's been a part of, positive change, both within organizations and, I think throughout the community in Toronto and beyond. Really, really excited to have her sharing her perspective on this important issue here today. And as well, for those who aren't familiar with Humi, although I'm sure many of you are already using the platform, we are a HR, payroll, and benefits solution provider. We're trying to make life easier for businesses and their employees through software. And part of that, we believe is bringing in people who can help, whether it's on topics like today or things that are, more directly correlated to business operations. We've been putting on webinars for the last almost 6 months now, and we plan to continue to do so. So hopefully everybody here finds that valuable. And like I said, the line's open for questions. So without further ado, Raia, I'll let you sort of take the show here, and I'll try to be insightful with my questions if I have any.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. And, thanks for having me. Thanks for putting this together. Obviously, big love to you and the team and to Chloe for all the back and forth. I said to Chloe, we're basically best friends now with all of the emails we've had going back and forth. So, you've got some competition, Simon. And, I think I want to preface this with saying, there may not be a lot of questions yet. And I understand that some people are secondary processors, so perhaps the questions may come later, but I want to make sure that I say that this is a safe space. And so if there are any questions that you may have been wanting to answer and haven't known how or to who, know that this is a safe space. Know that I'm not taking anything personally. And my biggest messaging, as you can see right here on the screen, is coming from a place of all love. So much so that I took that and turned it into an acronym and making that sort of my pillars for how I go about my diversity and inclusion training. I'm very much passionate about the call in rather than the call out. And we're going to go through a few of the key messaging today, a little bit of the history and a little bit about me so that everyone can understand, where I'm coming from and why I'm passionate about this and why this is important to me. So let's get into that first, and then we'll get into the more, technical things, if you will. And Simon's my assistant, so you can leave this screen up for now. You can leave the first one up for now.
I'm with you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Here we are. Then once I skip to once I finish my intro, then we can go. How about that?
I like it.
All right. Teamwork makes the dream work. Digital life. We're doing this. All right. So yeah, as Simon said, my name is Raia, but most people call me Coach Carey. I'm a 3-time certified life coach and motivational speaker. And I'm really passionate about helping people tap into their hidden confidence, which for me really feels like the foundation of everything we do. And so it really feels like it can be a pillar of so many impactful and important things, from the way we walk, talk, interact, eye contact, etc. However, it took me some time to get there. And I want to walk you through a little bit of my life so that you can understand, how we got to here, and again, why this is so important to me. Because I didn't always used to be confident. And I'm going to tie it all back as to how confidence has a big major role and how I've been able to face a lot of adversity and how I came up with my all love messaging to go about my D&I in general. And now I wasn't always confident. And I was bullied a lot. When I was younger, you know, I cried every day. I hated school. I didn't want to be there. And when I switched schools in grade 3, I believe it was, I had the mentality of let me hurt them before they hurt me, because I had already been the bully, you know, very much a normal mentality for any young person who had been bullied. However, I made no friends. So that sucked and I didn't like it. So I changed schools again in the following year in grade 4. And I'm thinking, okay, what can I do differently? I've been bullied. I've been the bully. What can I do differently? But I didn't know yet. So first day of grade 4, I walk into the classroom, and I truly always say that this is the day that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I walk into the classroom, I'm the only new kid. And on top of that, I was the only Black kid or person of color. I was the only fat kid, and again, the only new kid. So naturally, to an extent, at that age, kids can be mean sometimes. So I was being bullied. They were laughing about me, snickering about me, pointing at me. And I remember just going to the washroom and like bawling my eyes out and like sobbing, and, you know, like the messy cry, just, you know, one of those. We've all been there. And I somehow distinctively remember saying to myself, you've done this before, you'll do this again, you have friends. And somehow in that moment, I was able to access sort of my higher self and say, you know, this classroom isn't the end all be all. I have friends elsewhere, etc. And so I head back to the classroom, and along the way, it hit me how I could do things differently. And so I got back to the classroom, and instead of just sitting down at my seat, I did something different. And again, this is why I say it changed the trajectory of my entire life. And I went around the room and I introduced myself to every single kid, learned their name and something about them. Boom. In that moment, obviously, again, I'm only in grade 4, so I didn't recognize it, but I took away their preconceived notions. They're wanting to be mean to me. And when you understand where someone else is coming from and learn something about them, you're able to create more morale. So again, we're going to keep bringing this back as to how this plays a role in diversity and inclusion and, you know, my D&I work. So now that was my beginning of my tools. And we'll talk about tools a lot as well. As a life coach, I always like to bring it back to internal, what we can control. External things are always going to happen. But if we only focus on what we can't control, then we don't get as far. Whereas we can control what we interpret, what we think, how we react, etc. So from grade 4 to grade 10, I switched schools about 5 more times. So within those years, I was building this extremely solid foundation of resiliency, because I was consistently the new kid and the only person of color in every single one of those classrooms over and over and over again. And during all that time, really being a victim, so to speak, to covert racism. But because I was so young, I didn't necessarily know. What I knew is that it felt uncomfortable. What I knew is, do I say something or do I not? And this started to show up more and more throughout my entire life. I went on to do events for 10 years. And then at 25, I started to feel very unfulfilled. At 27, I heard about coaching. And it felt like it connected all the dots throughout my entire life, because I could be myself. I could bring my personality, share a little laughter in those moments as well, and not have the power to prescribe medication, which is something I didn't want to do. And that was 7 years ago. So now dating myself again, and I haven't looked back. And within that, I've been working with some of the top companies in the world for corporate wellness, D&I, keynotes, and one-on-one coaching. And so when I really was focusing on D&I and how I wanted to be true to myself, there were some ups and downs. And I'm going to get back to that in a moment. So Simon, go ahead and take us to the next slide.
All right, let's see how I do here.
So far, so good. And so, because again, this is a safe space, and I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. And so, in effect, to also be inclusive, I'm not going to assume that we all know everything or know the exact definition of all of these words. So let's go over them together. Number 1, equity. So equity is giving everyone what they personally need to be successful. This is important when it comes to an organization, because not everyone is able to utilize the tools that may be provided. And so we have to be able to meet people where they are at in some way, shape, or form. For example, if a company were to provide gas money for any person to get to work, in retrospect, that's great. But what about the people who can't afford a car? What about the people who take the subway? What about the people who take the GO train? So even something that, again, is a really, really great thing for a company to do, you can understand now how that may not be fully inclusive. Because when we think about inclusion, it's not just about, race or sex. It's about demographics and, lived experience and then so many other factors. And so equity is really about giving everyone and understanding where everyone's coming from as much as possible. So an easy fix for that example that I used would be to ask people, what is it that you would need? How do you get to work? And so the people who take the car can get the gas money. The people who take the TTC can get a Metro pass, and the people who take the GO train can get that.
I think that's, that in itself is a really interesting point
Mm-hmm.
with regard to the fact that D&I and an approach to diversity and inclusion doesn't just need to focus in on race and sex.
Exactly.
It actually is a very broad and often misunderstood topic.
Absolutely.
That needs to be addressed in a really fulsome way. And I think that even alone is something that most people don't think of. Like, for instance, even within our company, we've had instances where things that are outside of sex and race have raised issues with regard to, the thoughts of how we properly make sure people are included. I think that COVID is one of those things that has forced that to the forefront with regard to, home offices and how different people are set up and how you create a level playing field for getting your work done.
Absolutely.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up, and I'm excited to take that perspective, on this presentation.
Yeah. And I think that's what it's all about. We're not here to say, you're doing things wrong. We're here to talk about how can we improve things. And that's really what it's about. Again, a call in rather than a call out. So that kind of is my interpretation on how I like to explain equity. So let's move on to the next one. And so the next one is diversity. Again, these are all terms that we've all hearing, but let's just break it down in an effort to be as inclusive as possible in case there may be someone who doesn't exactly understand what it means and how it can pertain to them in their personal or professional life. So diversity is understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. Now, let me break that down in a way and give a good example. And the way I like to think about it is that diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And an underlining pillar of the two is belonging, to be your authentic self. And belonging is dancing as if no one is watching because you feel comfortable to do so. So we're using all these, buzzwords that are happening right now, but in an effort to explain it in a way that I think we all can relate to, is not just being invited because to meet a quota or whatever it may be, but to actually be asked to dance, to ask what your opinion is, to be asked what it is that you need, etc. So that's my fun little way to explain it.
That's an amazing
right?
Comparison. I see here Ben, one of the guests here, commented on that. I think that's unreal. And even just that as a nugget is a really great way to explain it to people.
Right?
Because, I think people often conflate the term diversity and inclusion as meaning the same thing, right? Like,
they're different,
this is a blanket term that just means, like you said, inviting people to the party, or like so often just meeting quotas and things that can be represented in data.
Exactly.
Right? Like there's a lot of measurement happening right now within, almost every industry around, how diverse is your team or is your product, in film, and we're seeing that change with the Academy Awards and their quotas, et cetera, which I think are all good things. But it is only surface level, and there is a need to go deeper, and making that clear with such a great, is it a simile? I don't know. I'm bad.
Analogy? I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. Similes and analogies. I'm getting those mixed up too. But no, I think that's outstanding.
Exactly. So, and again, the goal is to provide everyone with a little bit of info. I'm not saying that, tomorrow we're all going to be perfect and know everything about everything. I don't know everything about everything. Just because someone may be from a diverse background doesn't necessarily mean they're a diverse leader, right? So it's work that we all must do. It's work that takes all of us actively and intentionally making change towards it, to literally try to just be better. And so hopefully that the goal for us today is to just give everyone a little bit of something, a little bit of nuggets to take with you. I'm not expecting everyone to memorize all the definitions and all that stuff, right? But first of all, everyone showed up. We have 115 people on this call. To me, that's, half the work is showing up to listen. So let's move on to the next one.
Got it.
What a good sidekick.
So we'll see how I continue to do.
Yeah. Right. So again, these are the definitions you're probably going to see, but I think the example and the analogy we're using is a little bit easier to digest. But, inclusion, really the achievement of a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly, respectfully, and have equal access to opportunity and resources. Apparently I wasn't done my sentence there. A little comma for no reason. Hello.
It's good anyways.
Right. So kind of just elaborating on that example is really feeling like you're not just there because maybe they meet numbers. You're there because it's out of respect. It's hearing what you have to say, and it's actually taking it in because your opinion matters, which then in turns brings in more of that belonging. I've been in a million rooms where I know I'm the token. And to be honest with you, that has at times given me some, for lack of a better term, backlash from other, people of color. And my response is always the same, is that I'd rather take the opportunity to be a token, to create space to learn and grow, and to create more spaces. Because if I don't take that seat and use it as an opportunity for growth, and I say, oh, I don't want to do that because I'm the only Black person on the panel, or whatever it may be. It's just, that's the same mentality that is going to continue to divide us and hinder us. Whereas my approach is, okay, well, I got a seat, no matter how it showed up. And it's a matter of how I use that seat. Just like it's a matter of how, anyone with privilege uses their privilege. There's nothing wrong with being born privileged. It's a matter of how you use it. So very much my messaging, and again, how we got to this all love, which we're slowly building up to. We can go to the next one.
Okay, here we go.
And then we'll pause here. So equality, again, that's why I put them on both on here, because equity and equality very much can be easily confused. So equality is ensuring individual groups are not treated differently or less favorably on the basis of their specific protected characteristics. So for example, within a workspace, especially if you're thinking about gender for a minute here, sometimes companies will offer the promotion to the man rather than the woman. And so in retrospect, if you think about equality or all of the things we're talking about, the role should be offered to the person who meets the most criteria, because everyone should be evaluated on the same playing field. Doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, but are you meeting the requirements of the specific role to warrant the promotion? And oftentimes the women don't even get asked at all, don't even get invited to the party, right? So equality is ensuring that can go to anyone and put that out there so that the best person who fits for the job and is the most qualified gets the role.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic in that I just had a question come through that's really
Absolutely.
on this topic. And it addresses, I guess, some of the underlying issues that drive towards that that outcome of choosing, the person who's most qualified. Specifically, somebody is asked, how do you take into account the fact that many underrepresented groups may have been held back by their lack of privilege? And
For sure.
There are cases, and this person's suggested that often when they're looking at hiring roles, many of the strong candidates fit the bill of what many would expect as to be a privileged white male sort of audience. And and how do you address that when you know that some of the underlying causes for that divide between candidates when you're hiring might be because of privilege, and like you said, you want to hire based on merit, but at the same time you're trying to create a diverse workplace and allow for people who may have come from less of a platform to have the same opportunity to grow over the long term. And I think that's a really common, like I've heard that not just today here from this one viewer in this question, but heard that from other business leaders, stating that they think there's an imbalance in their hiring pool. I mean, a great example that's more specific is, when you're hiring software engineers, it is a largely male dominant field. It's often hard to find, as many qualified female developers. There just aren't as many in numbers, just when you look at the education all the way up to, senior levels. And so what's your view on position, like maybe hiring not just based on merit, because there can be, things holding back certain candidates that you want to hire that maybe don't look as good on paper.
For sure. That's a tricky one for many reasons. And so let me try to cover all of them as best I can. The number one reason why that is tricky is because of systemic racism. And so systemic racism, for anyone, again, we're making sure that we go over this, and it's not bad that you don't know what this means, or, we're here to call people in. And systemic racism really means racism that has been embedded within the processes and strategies within a company, probably long before any of us were ever born. And the problem with that is meaning everyone new coming into the company now abides by all that systemic racism, 90% of the time, not even being aware of it. And so, and that also is, systemic sexism as well. It's not by chance that the programmer and tech world is lacking numbers in women. It's because women were never encouraged. Women were never deemed to go into that realm. So then as a result, most women didn't go into that realm. And so I think that opening it up to kind of anyone and kind of utilizing resources in terms of other places where you could potentially get candidates. And that could be something that is discussed within, the industry. If you're hiring a programmer, but you recognize that it's mostly men, well, you have to hire someone. And so maybe you say, hey, if you know anyone that's a woman, we'd love to, be able to hire some as well. We still think all these candidates are great, but let's expand the search a little. And if that doesn't work, then it's like, okay, take an inventory on the entire company. What are the numbers like? Because maybe programmers, because of history, is not as robust with women, but perhaps the other areas of that company can be, to kind of balance it out. And as you expand and reach out to other organizations or agencies and stuff like that, say, hey, we're specifically looking for a woman in this role because as of right now we haven't been able to, and our program side is mostly men. So I think it's also about having those conversations and not being scared to be like, hey, we know that we haven't hired as many, but we're looking, we're actively looking.
No, I think that's fair. And do you believe, because this is a hot topic, and this isn't a question, this is my own question here. Do you believe that maybe at times it is fair to hire somebody who is, maybe not the same qualification on paper, because you're trying to, not necessarily meet a quota, but build a diverse culture, because there's external value from diverse opinions and so forth?
I do, because I think for me, that to me looks like the company is investing. Because again, we have to be able to dismantle the systemic racism that has kept a lot of minorities and people who are, part of the BIPOC communities haven't been able to. So if someone says, okay, I recognize that you may not have some people may not have as many qualifications, but can I invest in them? Say, okay, we'd love to hire you, and we're also going to be covering the cost of this course. And it's a 6-month course or something. And a lot of companies do that. So then that person feels included and belonging, because the company is now believing in them and investing in them, and the chances of that person leaving that company within the first 2 years decrease significantly. And I think that's a really great way to combat that because, you know, and I think that's changing a lot in the industry as well, or just in general in corporate, that they're like, listen, you may not be the perfect candidate, but that's not what we want. At the end of the day, I think a lot of companies are getting on board with the fact that they want their communities to be diverse because more innovation happens, as well as we all kind of are getting to the place of the company should look like the world we walk in.
Yeah. And I completely agree. For me, it was the leading question because it's my view as well that often you should be looking at more than just necessarily the qualifications or the resume.
For sure.
And
for
thinking
sure.
about the external value that diversity brings to the business. Like I
Exactly.
think that diverse backgrounds lead to diverse opinions, and
Exactly.
you need conflicting opinions if you want to end up in a place of, with an optimal result. I also think, and I personally had this experience, the longer you wait to develop diversity within your organization, the harder it is to develop it in the future.
Absolutely. It's hard to backtrack.
And when that prime candidate comes along in the future that, you know, maybe is the most qualified, forgetting race, sex, etc. Maybe it's going to be harder to hire that person down the line because you forgot to build a diverse culture to begin with.
Exactly.
That idea of inclusion is often perceived, and on the way in, it can be hard to hire somebody who's very talented and underrepresented community if your company is not diverse.
For sure.
So and there's a ton of value there, in my opinion.
Exactly. Because if someone who it might be from a diverse community sees the company has no one, they may not even want to, you know, apply. And I think we're also in general moving away from only looking good on paper in general, because there's so much more that can be communicated outside of paper. And I think, again, that was a lot of things that worked well a long time ago. You know, how many interns have said, hey, you can't get this job because you have no experience? And the response is, well, I'm trying to get experience. Where can I get experience if no one will hire me?
Yeah.
Similar idea. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to take a minute here to just go and give it a little bit of some historical context, because I think that's another really big pillar into everything that's going on in the world. And a lot of people don't know. And I think that a lot of things that have been showing up, especially from people in the BIPOC community, is anger. And that anger is totally warranted. However, that anger, as most people know, it doesn't really call people in, whether warranted or not. Most people, especially someone who's maybe potentially trying to learn and unlearn or become a better ally, it can be tough to lean in when you're met with anger. However, the anger is not necessarily just because of George Floyd's murder. The anger is coming from over 400 years of oppression, systemic racism, killings, anything that would oppress anyone, any person of color, and specifically Black people. And, you know, everyone always says that Canada is better and there's not as much racism here, but there's just as much racism. And I want to highlight this a little bit because, you know, we're not exempted from it. And, you know, in Canada, the economy thrived off of using slavery. And the reason why I think it's kind of been misconstrued that we have done a better job than the US is only because we abolished slavery sooner. And Canada abolished slavery in 1834 and the US in 1865, I believe. And the reason why these dates are significant is because without that, we wouldn't have had the Underground Railroad, and Canada being a huge staple in the civil rights movement. And so Niagara Falls and St. Catharines are really big places because that's where was the easiest access point to get into Canada from wherever you were being enslaved. And the Underground Railroad, for anyone who doesn't know, again, this is all us learning, growing, and sharing together, was really a system of, and this is where I come into allyship and why that's so big, is because that's the only thing that worked in the past. So if we can't figure out allyship now, it's not as much will move. And so the Underground Railroad was the, you know, politicians and affluent and wealthy white people who realized, hey, this isn't right, paired with the Black leaders and people who were already freed slaves, came together and helped free slaves. And so it was a system of, okay, well, this is a house you can hide in. This is a passageway. Now when you get to Canada, we'll have a job, we'll have a name for you, we'll have money and a place to stay. So when I think about allyship, I think about how had we not had allyship, we wouldn't have had the Underground Railroad. We wouldn't have people like Harriet Tubman and things like that. And so then two little stories. Rosa Parks, obviously we all know her, refused to sit on the back of the bus, started really a civil rights movement, not because she wanted to be a rebel or a activist. What happened was that she was so well connected because she was popular in her church group and was a seamstress for all the wealthy white people. And so when she got arrested and word spread, it literally caused an uproar. So again, allyship, networking, building connections, working together. And then in Canada, we kind of have our own version of Rosa Parks, Viola Desmond. For any of you who doesn't know, she sat in the whites only section of a movie theater and was removed. Years later, I think as of like 2010, she got a full pardon, and she is now the face of our $10 bill. So we have a lot of history, we have work to do, but it is significant to note that, you know, Canada abolished slavery about 30 years prior to the US.
And that's really what drove like people's perception that Canada is more inclusive.
Exactly.
When in reality, that history still exists.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's tons of history to our Indigenous brothers and sisters and that as well, which I think are important for us to dive into, maybe not today, but definitely a lot that Canada can do better. And, you know, a lot of those things weren't that long ago. You know, I think the last segregated school in Nova Scotia was like 1994. It's not that long ago, right?
No, that I didn't know that, but I know that it has been something that, you know, a lot of people assume because we're Canadian, we're better than, you know, we're better than that. But the truth is that, you know, that mindset is not helpful, right? And I think that understanding that there are underlying issues that still need to be solved here is extremely important. And you know, somebody mentioned here in the chat, you know, the conversation around making sure that implementation really starts at the top.
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, it's extremely important that so many people who are viewers today have an impactful role within their business, or have an impactful role within the community in some way, shape, or form, and encouraging leaders to take an approach that, you know, acknowledges the fact that there are still issues to be addressed here and that this isn't an American issue, I think is really important. And I think that it has to start from the top.
Absolutely. It has to be top down, bottom up. And in my opinion, the fastest way to accelerate change within a company is empowering more leaders. Because again, just because someone may be from a diverse or is not racist, doesn't mean they're not anti-racist. And again, doesn't mean they're a diverse leader. And so if we can empower those people who are in leadership roles to lead from a diverse and inclusive mindset, that's when it can spread up and spread down. And I don't think it can just be an intervention type of fix, because that's not going to work. An intervention approach won't work. I think really sustainable change, it has to evolve each year, because as things are growing, it's moving quickly. So it can't be, hey, we did that D&I training once 2 years ago, let's do the same one this year. No, it has to evolve every year. And I think one of the other best ways that a company can, you know, embody this is by really supporting the creation of staff-led groups. And so not just letting them be there, but also supporting them, whether monetary or otherwise, so that there's always continuous learning, continuous implementation, and really fostering that strong morale of community and team, and processes, so that when things happen, everyone knows that this is a safe space to talk about it, rather than calling someone out in the middle of the meeting. For example, 2 weeks ago, I was doing something like this and someone said, oh yeah, bottom of the totem pole. Now, that's actually a pretty derogatory phrase to our Indigenous brothers and sisters, which is interesting because it's actually doesn't even make sense, because the bottom of the totem pole is actually the most important part and the strongest and the biggest and the pillar and the foundation. So it actually doesn't even make sense, but someone wouldn't necessarily know that because it's been a phrase that's been used all the time. So what does someone do? Call them out in the middle of it and say, wow, you know, you're an ass. Like, how could you do this? Or if that was in the workspace, what is the process? There needs to be a process already implemented or created so that when those things arise, that person who feels offended walks away and carries resentment and anger. And the person who said it doesn't walk away thinking it's totally cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and whether it's mediation or having anonymous, like a survey monkey type of situation, or, okay, let's have a conversation together. The idea is always having that morale so that when these things arise, we can have those conversations. We have to get comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you know, that touches on 2 points. One, a
Mm-hmm.
thought that I have, and then as well, a question that just came in.
Yeah,
You know, on one side, I think, you know, I think it's incredibly important to have a framework in place.
absolutely.
And I think that a lot of businesses right now are sprinting to try to put a framework together
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that should have been there previously,
Absolutely.
but nonetheless is important to address, right? You need to have a process for how to go about bringing any type of concern forward.
Absolutely.
And that jumps into, you know, a question from one of the viewers, which is, you know, how do you respond to accusations of being racist in the workplace? I guess, you know, that question can be viewed from multiple angles. One is, how do you handle the idea of accusations of racism within your workplace if you're a manager,
Mm-hmm.
or personally being accused of being racist? You know, I wonder, you know, what is, in your perspective, an appropriate mechanism for handling those types of scenarios in an office or work environment?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one. I think in regards to the company being named racist, I think that one is very much I hear you. Let's figure out a way to do how we can do better. And then that's a kind of all hands on deck. That's a, let me bring in the experts and reflect upon ourselves. I think any company who has not gone about it the right way has mostly tried to do the intervention fix, tried to kind of negate it, or have never thought about diversity and inclusion, period. So if there was already a diversity and inclusion team in place and of some kind, then perhaps that would slow down the growth or comments, etc. For example, I'm sure everyone remembers not long ago when a very, very popular fashion brand had some racist branding. I don't want to speak to it per se, but I'm sure a lot of people know what I'm talking about, H&M. And they were like, oh, we had no idea. Okay, but you didn't have one person on your team diverse who would say, hey, I don't know if this is exactly right. Let's inquire. Mm-hmm. Instead, they said, yeah, for sure. I don't have any lived experience about this. I don't know anything about this. So of course it's fine. Mm-hmm. So the lived experience and bringing that in full circle to have those conversations. So one, I think diversity inclusion team, no matter what, every company should have one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think processes in terms of regular meetings, regular learnings, and an anonymous platform to have that conversation. And then if someone personally were to have said something, then that can be brought there. And then depending on if the person who was offended feels comfortable to have a conversation, 4 people in the room so that it's a bit mediated, but it has to be coming from a place of love and understanding and respect.
Yeah.
Because not everyone who potentially says something racist is racist. Yeah. And that's a really hard part to differentiate between, especially as a person who's on the receiving end. Of course, they're upset, they're hurt, it's painful. But that person may not know. For example, the person who's at the bottom of the totem pole, is that person fully racist? I don't know. But that comment was just very much, oh, I've heard a million other people, so I didn't know it was harmful. Yeah. So I think education is the underlining pillar to all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, there was another comment earlier in the chat thread that I think in some ways ties into this, which is, you know, is there a risk of today with the momentum with regard to focusing in on diversity inclusion, is there a risk that some policies become overcorrected? You know, there's a comment in the thread, and I think it was around the time that we were just talking about, you know, recruiting policies and the idea of, at least what I think is the right thing to do, which is favoring diversity, even if the candidate necessarily isn't the best on paper, because of the value that diversity brings to the organization.
Yep.
And I think that, I'm curious to get your take if you've heard of this idea. I think that everybody kind of has in one way, shape, or form had this conversation around overcorrection.
Yeah.
And, and maybe not in that specific terminology, but what's your view? Is there even a possible way that you could overcorrect? Because my view would be no. My view would obviously be that the only overcorrection could be, outright racism towards, more privileged groups. But I don't think anything barring that could be considered an overcorrection. And I'm curious to get your take.
Yeah, I definitely have heard this come up a couple of times, and it's a really interesting take, because for me, it feels like one of those other side of the coin that we won't be able to see yet. Mm-hmm. Just like social media, no one thought that it would be changing people's physical reactions and communication and language skills and all these other things. So I think it's hard to say, but what I will say is that I think at the end of the day, there still needs to be balance, and hard work always should be rewarded. And I think it really comes down to, how is the team looking already? Mm-hmm. So if the team is predominantly men, and all of the people who are sending in their resumes are men, that's a space for, okay, we can't really, even if you're qualified, that's just not what we can do right now, because, diversity and inclusion is important to us as a company. And we recognize that we haven't done as good of a job as we could have. So I think there has to be some form of balance. And if the team is already all diverse, then okay, the next hire, who's most qualified? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think it really it becomes a matter to looking internally at how the team is already diverse and ensuring that there's a representation for everybody. So if the team is, all male and, cisgender, white, etc., then it's like, okay, then if male is only place that we can hire, or that's the, tech or whatever it might be, then look to hire a person of color, male, or, so it's really tough to speak to, but I think
my perspective personally is that you can't overcorrect right now. There's no such thing as overcorrection. There's so much work still to be done that people who are concerned about potentially overcorrecting, maybe either don't value the diversity to the extent that it should be valued, or maybe don't fully see the underlying issues that are currently within our our culture. I think that 10 years from now, maybe we should be talking about overcorrection.
Yeah, it's going to be a few years.
Now, this is just correction.
Yeah, exactly. But without systemically fixing processes, none of the rest will matter. So again, bringing it back to looking internally and looking at the systemic things that may already be in place would be a great place for any company to start. And then they can maybe start thinking about overcorrection in some time, because for the most part, we're dismantling years of potential oppression and discrimination in the workplace. So it'll take time to,
agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great questions. I love it. Let's go to the next slide. Let me just quickly go over what I mean by all love, and then we can open up for some questions as well. So
just to also time check, we actually only have 10 minutes left.
Exactly.
I know there's commentary coming through, there's questions.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly breeze through this so that we can leave the last 10 minutes, because it's pretty self-explanatory. Everyone here is, obviously pretty well versed on these types of things, and to an extent. So I made this as a way that is, digestible, that everyone can resonate with at least one part of this. And if that's one thing you can take away to say, okay, how can I be different? Here's an easy acronym. Okay, so the A, acknowledge, align, and action. We can do all the talking we want, but if we don't actually take action, nothing will change. First L, listen. If you are in a place of saying, hey, I might be someone who has been living in systemic racism or potentially said racist things, and someone brings that to your attention, it is not your time to have rebuttals. It is your time to listen. L, learn. You can't ask every person of color you know questions. They may not have the answers and they may not want to have those conversations. So take some time upon yourself to learn and do some of the research. Next one.
Absolutely. And coming back to that, I think that's a great, those first three letters, I think, really relate to the idea of putting in place policies or a committee within the company.
Exactly.
To create that space for listening, learning,
exactly.
and acknowledgement.
Exactly.
At the very least, what that accomplishes is acknowledgement within the organization.
Absolutely. And I think the committee is a great place to start, because especially it's staff led, right? And had some of those companies like, Gucci putting a noose as a fashion piece, had they had a D&I committee, at least one person on that committee would have said, not a fashion piece, right? So the L in love is lead with love. At the end of the day, we are all trying to be leaders, and you never know where someone else is coming from, or their lived experience, or what they're going through. And that goes on both sides of the coin as well. Be open-minded. There are tons of other ethnicities and cultures and things we may not all know about, and it's a great space to be like, I'm open to learning. It may not have to all resonate with you, but it doesn't mean it has to be something that you can't respect. V, validate. Everyone wants to be heard and validated. If you are in a place of someone sharing with you their experience or having endured racism, one of the easiest ways to make them feel good is to validate you. I hear you, and it's understandable that that's how you're feeling. Super simple. And lastly, E, evolve and educate. So as we learn, we naturally evolve, and when we share that knowledge and those learnings with others, we educate, and then ideally bringing up everyone around us, our community, our offices, and our teams.
I love it. No, honestly, it's fantastic, and it really encompasses everything that people should be thinking about.
Yeah, and it's just, it doesn't have to be that difficult, but we can start somewhere, and that's my big thing.
And I know that this acronym is a big part of the work that you do, broadly speaking, not just on this topic.
Absolutely.
Because it does in many ways filter into everything that people should be doing and thinking about. This is not just a specific formula for thinking about diversity and inclusion. Exactly.
And really, it's not a race, it's a marathon. So I think that for anyone who's learning or unlearning anything from their past or their parents or their heritage or their family, I see you, I honor you, and I love you. I understand and recognize that learning and unlearning things is difficult too. And I respect that. And so, and for any of the POCs out there, you matter, and it's time to take care of yourself as well. And yeah. Okay, we can do a couple of questions, and then you can scroll to the last page and everyone can get my info.
Okay, cool. I like it. Yeah, because we got about 5 minutes left. I've got a question here that comes back to a comment you made earlier, which I think it's actually a really interesting question. When you were discussing being placed on panels and feeling as though, or maybe outright obviously being used as a token, and with regards to tokenism in general, our viewer has a question with regard to the best approach that a white person can take when they're trying to create a workshop and include somebody, and it may be that the person they're trying to include is for that diverse opinion, and therefore will feel like they're being used as a token. What's the best approach to make sure that doesn't come off as something negative? Like,
great question.
You obviously have some personal experience with this.
Tons.
You may have had certain experiences that were bad versus good.
Yeah.
And how would you differentiate or like help somebody to approach something like this when in fact, that this may be the case?
Well, hire us. So Simon, give a little scroll down in case anyone has to jump off. My info should be on the last page there. And
is this the Let's Connect?
Yeah, you got it. Cool. So anyone who would like to reach out, please do. If you have any further questions, or you're, one of those secondary processors, and you may think about this tonight and be like, oh, I have a question I didn't get to ask, feel free to email me. My personal email is there, my Instagram, my Facebook, my LinkedIn. And so I think if anyone wants to include people, that is already a great start. And I think it's really about the approach and how they go about it. For example, if I were to get emailed to do a panel and every other person is a white woman with blonde hair, whether their intentions are good or not, I may feel a little token. And so my question in return would be like, this isn't a very diverse group. Not sure this is something I want to be a part of. So when you're thinking of building a diverse panel, ensure that it is actually diverse, you know, because if everyone is of one and you're like, oh, let's just add this person, again, whether your intentions are good, it can come off like that. And if you're reaching out to someone, you could say, you know, it's really important to me to ensure that there is representation in many forms. And I want to bring you on for the work that you do, for your expertise, and to pay them. Very, very simple. And I think that that is the kind of messaging that would be well received, rather than, hey, last minute, can you do this? Or, hey, it's fully booked, but we have one spot left. Maybe you could do it. No, don't make me an afterthought. You know, be honest, communicate, and book me because of what I'm good at, not because of the color of my skin or my gender or whatever it may be.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things you said there, you know, resonates with me in particular, which is like really explain the case, right? If you are in a situation where perhaps you've got a company that isn't that diverse and you're looking for a diverse opinion, and you know that you're, you know, creating a panel or group that might be perceived as adding somebody for token purposes, you know, make sure that there's a complete explanation around why you're trying to include that person for a diverse opinion, for the work and for the perspective, and being really open about that, not being afraid to have that conversation, I think is really important.
Exactly.
There's a ton of questions that are coming in here at the end. I know we don't have a lot of time, but there's one kind of interesting one, which maybe you could answer before we hop off. We got 3 minutes left. This is a quick one though. That's why I'm choosing it. There's other questions here, and by the way, for everybody who's on the call, we're going to be sharing these slides, and we'll also be trying to answer any of the questions that we didn't get to personally. If we have,
I'm happy to help with that as well, for sure.
Yeah. And Raia is available, of course. Please feel free to reach out and contact her. She does this work professionally with organizations, with individuals, and is incredible. In case you didn't pick it up today, is an incredible person to work with. Just amazing energy and a huge source of knowledge. And so on that point of knowledge, Raia, your number one must read or must watch for any company's inclusion and diversity committee.
Woo,
so there was
great
one. If there was a one share, if you had to throw one out there.
Can I do one? Can I do two?
Do two, sure.
Okay. So one is the book White Fragility. And, White Privilege. I was literally just looking at it. I think it's White Fragility. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think so. Yeah, I think
pretty sure right. It's a big book that's happening right now, because everyone's reading and trying to unlearn and relearn. The second one I would be to watch 13th, which is on Netflix, which really is a great breakdown. And someone also said Me and White Supremacy, which is also I believe a pretty good book. Yeah, and then I would say watching 13th on, I believe it's on Netflix, which really gives a great breakdown of sort of the history as well, because again, it's not what's happening right now, it's the 400 years. And what would be my other one? I also have a video on my Instagram that interests anyone, which is about an hour live, and I really just break down how covert racism has impacted me in all areas of my life, with a few call-ins for allies and some love to POCs. And apparently a lot of my people and offices have said they've watched it with their teams, and it's been really helpful. So that's available to anyone just on my Instagram and my IGTV. And the last thing I would do is there's a quiz that's called the White or Your Privilege quiz. And I think that's a great one to do with your teams. If Maybe I can send that in the group chat really quickly because the power of computers. Here we go, coming in 2 seconds. So this is a great one that anyone could do with their teams. And it's just a really simple way to look at things in a way that people haven't thought about. For example, you know, have you ever been in a position where you had, you know, food hunger or food scarcity? So just really breaking things down like that, popping that in the group chat now.
Yeah,
it's a great one that you could send out to your team.
Yeah, I think that type of stuff is amazing. It's an amazing place to start because it allows people who maybe didn't feel, you know, any context to kind of see it on paper and understand, you know, the issue with a little bit more personal connection.
Exactly.
Thank you for those recommendations.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think the other thing is just keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And have those conversations with your friends, your family, your kids, your dog, whoever, everyone.
I love it. and thank you so much for joining. I know we're just out of time here and I see some people hopping off, but really, really, really appreciate you sharing the perspective.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah. Thank you everybody who joined. Again, you know, please feel free to reach out to Raia directly. You know, please feel free to join future webinars. You know, if you haven't checked out Humi, obviously check out Humi. And you know, hoping to see you all again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. See you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.